Hi, everyone. Lauren Gates here. I'm the Director of Open Source at Sangoma Technologies. So welcome one and all to our second virtual presentation. On deck, we have Scott Holtzman, who's been working with FreePBX and Asterisk professionally since 2006. And he just reminded me that that is starting with FreePBX version 1.2 and Asterisk version 1.2. Scott is a longtime supporter of the Asterisk and FreePBX open source communities and is presenting his thoughts today in a talk titled The Future of Securing FreePBX. So without further ado, I'll ask Scott to begin sharing his screen so we can see his slides, and then take over so that we can benefit from his experience. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and good morning to everybody that's here. I assume you can see my screen just fine, and it is very nice to be back with my friends once again and talking about my favorite subject, FreePBX. So let's just jump in and go over some very simple basics that I think we all know, but let's go ahead and review these security features. The basic tools, we have external resources. That would include your firewall, your corporate firewall at your location, or your session border controller. The on-host resources, those are programs that run on the FreePBX server, include the responsive firewall, which is part of the FreePBX project, and fail-to-ban, which is an included package, and it is a separate project that's that is included because it provides features that can benefit the FreePBX community. And lastly, a relatively unknown feature, and that's the Endpoint VPN that most of the telephones we use from Sangoma to Yealink and many other vendors include a VPN client. External firewalls provide services such as basic access controls. This allows us to open and close various ports that could be used maliciously. Some firewalls are stateful, and by stateful I mean that they follow the call through setup and teardown and keep track of each session in the firewall and make sure that the integrity of that session. Some firewalls attempt to implement application layer gateways that actually mimic the SIP protocol and then relay it onto the server. These usually do not work well with Asterisk, and we suggest that they be turned off. Lastly, we have the Cisco Inspect feature set, which is actually Inspect has been around for a while, but it has been expanded to include about 90% of the SIP phrase words, such as opening a call and tearing down a call and all basic SIP dialogue that occurs, hello and such. So the next device is the session border controller, and the basic feature set of session border controllers is you've got a security set, and that's denial of service, toll fraud, SIP and RTP flooding, and topology hiding. Now let's talk about each one of those just briefly for a second. So denial of service, it looks at the quantity of calls coming in, and if they exceed certain thresholds, then it determines this is a denial of service attack, and it either shuts down that source IP or it throttles that source IP. Toll fraud, it looks at dial patterns and makes sure that the dial patterns are not repetitious and being used in a manner that would be searching for ways to bypass toll protections within the PBX. SIP and RTP flooding look at the messaging side. Are too many SIP messages being sent that would be inappropriate? Or RTP messages, which is the audio, RTP unformatted that doesn't fit the dialogue that's going on right now. So those are important. Those are important features because they allow not just simply looking at the quantity of data, but the quality of data going across the link. And lastly, we talk about topology hiding. Now FIG is a protocol that generally only is spoken about within a 3GPP context, but session border controllers have brought it down to be used in the enterprise setting. And topology hiding makes sure that none of the network resources can be mapped or discovered via malicious commands. So it hides the internal architecture. Only the single IP is ever seen. Only a single IP is ever seen by the end user. Only the session border controller can also be used in a remote worker setup without any need to open ports in the firewall. It monitors the registrations against the user database for malicious activity. So let's talk about this for a second. The session border controller connects to the database inside FreePBX, and each time a SIP registration or call attempt is made, that database is consulted to make sure that it is coming from a valid user, and that call is tracked all the way through. If it's malicious activity, again, that IP can either be banned or throttled. The reason you don't need to open ports in the firewall is because the users are registering to the session border controller, not to the FreePBX or to the firewall or any other type of registration gateway. The session border controller is a single point of contact for all external devices. With these features, you can build cloud phone networks, corporate and service provider networks, if you wanted to provide SIP services. These security features are essential. It manages inter-provider traffic if you are using various SIP providers. It can make sure that the quality of those conversations with those SIP providers are assured, and they're not flooding us, and we're not flooding them. It provides a common registration gateway for all of your users. And this is not just a feature for ISPs, but the billing and charging feature of the SPC allows you to collect your CDRs, your call detail records, prior to the call in the phone system, and that gives you an audit trail of phone conversations to make sure that that everything is being accounted for. And with this charging gateway or CDR collection at the actual registration point, you can be assured that that all calls are accounted for. I have no idea why those pictures are not viewable in full screen, so we'll just move on from them. I apologize for that. The Endpoint VPN. This is an exciting feature. exciting to me because most users are not familiar with it. We talked earlier, the SIP endpoints, certainly most of the Sangomas, and I can't think of a vendor that doesn't include them. Yealink, I gave as an example, does, but you can name off almost any SIP endpoint, and it has OpenVPN. FreePBX includes an OpenVPN server configuration by default. These two pieces allow you to build an end-to-end package so that you can encrypt all of your calls. No need to configure the firewall for SIP. Extremely simple configuration on the phones and the system. OpenVPN is configured in the phone's endpoint profile. So let's talk about that for a second. So when you set up the phone's parameters so that it can register with the system, you would include these VPN parameters. And when the phone registers and receives its package, let's say you have pre-programmed busy lamp fields or user dial options in there, any custom features that you may be pushing, any phone applications, all those things are pushed over in the configuration. This would be included in that. Once it is, the path between the phone and the user is encrypted. The TLS SSL utilized by OpenVPN is firewall friendly. Usually only requires a port, if that, to be allowed inbound. Something I don't have in here is if you're not using the Ethernet port on the back of your telephone, that port is on the VPN. So if you connect it to your PC, that would also be VPN'd back to the enterprise network. So the phone could become a VPN endpoint for remote users all by itself. And then the OpenVPN firewall sits behind the corporate firewall. So the corporate firewall would forward the TLS SSL requests to the OpenVPN firewall so that these phones could register. And as I said, it's just a few extra lines of configuration in the phone's configuration file. Looking at FreePBX features that we have, we touched on these earlier. We have the fail to ban, and fail to ban is a separate project. It's a simple program. What it does is it looks at the log files, whether it be the SIP access or SIP registration or SSH, and it bans any IP or jails it, to use its term, that fails authorization. The responsive, and I should say that you can manage these jails within FreePBX. So if it accidentally jails an IP that you wanted to authorize, you can release it from the jail right there within a simple interface inside FreePBX. The responsive firewall uses a SIP database to create access lists on the fly, and this uses the newer channel PJ SIP. It can support legacy CHAN SIP, but we really recommend that people have migrated off of that and are using CHAN PJ SIP. We being the community of engineers. So firewall rules. They are the firewall is fully featured. You can open and close different ports, like I mentioned, allowing SSH for managing the Linux server that all this runs on. That's just one example. Of course, you can manage HTTPS. You can manage HTTPS so that users can access their voicemail and their comm panel from remote offices or from these VPN sessions. And certain users could also be allowed to access the configuration. Excuse my pause as I'm having some upper respiratory issues. I'm coughing. My apologies. Anyway, you can control user access to actual programming and configuring the FreePBX through the firewall rules. So there are extensive rule sets that can be based on IPs or groups of IPs or single IPs or IPs within the VPN scope. So lots within local scopes within the office. You can get very creative as to what you can do with the FreePBX firewall. Well, we didn't get to take a look at those pictures, so we're just a couple minutes short of where we wanted to be with the question and answers today. So I'm going to just open that up to Q&A, and we can go back and talk about any of these items that we did before. Elvita, do users raise their hand and you allow them to speak, or?
Anyone has any questions, they can type them into the questions field in the webinar, and we'll relay them to you as they come in. While we wait for people to do that, I'll kick things off, Scott, to ask you if you have any anecdote from your long years where you saw something that I'm just trying to think of specific cases where security was particularly critically important and got overlooked. The one that comes to mind was a compromised firewall. I don't remember the name, and I won't guess at what it was, which allowed inbound connections directly to the PBX, but they were proxied by the firewall. So the inbound malicious attempts appeared to come from the IP address of the edge device and created all manner of chaos internally. Wonder if you have any horror stories along those lines or something like that.
I do, and they were very, very similar. You know, we talk about security, and we get I don't want to say lost in the weeds, but that's not a bad term. But talking about closing ports and which ports should be open and closed. But we also have to be very careful of what services and dial plans that we're allowing. And one of them is the when FreePBX was first starting, most people were not aware that this 10-digit North American dial plan included some parts of Latin America. It included the Caribbean islands, and it even had some toll zones within the United States that were $1 a minute or $2 a minute, and were just meant to run up charges and create toll fraud. So now these NXX MPAs or area codes and exchanges are very well known, but back then they were not, and we were getting calls from customers that, hey, we just got a toll alert that we charged $1,000 last night in SIP transactions on our ITSP. What's going on? And we dug, and they were just allowing all North American numbers in, and several clients got bit by this, and then we started publishing that. We started publishing a list of exchanges that should be banned. And now that's very common knowledge.
Yep, another good example. I'd forgotten about that too. That there's such a small subset of the North American numbering plan, which are problematic, that it's easy to overlook until one learns that lesson the hard way. A question from Corey. I am currently using Sangoma FreePBX. Does the Open VPN feature just require some setup on my end? I presume he's talking about the VPN client in the phone, but he just states Open VPN feature.
I think he's talking about the server within FreePBX, but why don't we touch on both just to make sure that the question is fully answered. So you would install the Open VPN feature, which is completely free, and you would configure it to listen on a port, and then you can certainly manually configure the phones if you're not familiar with writing the XML files that directly configure the telephones. You could go into the phone's HTTPS interface and put those VPN credentials in, and the phone would connect to the VPN that way. And that's really all there is to it. I did look there. There's several, and we can add them to the. That's a good thing. I'll make a note of that. We'll add some web links to the end of this for some sample configurations of how to set up OpenVPN. But yeah, you set up the server portion, and the server just starts and listens on the address that you give, and you set up various security parameters and how it authenticates, and then you have to put matching parameters in the phone. It's real important when you're troubleshooting this, because if you make one mistake in your key that you're sending, that's the most important item. That's the passphrase that's exchanged. You can see that by watching the OpenVPN log. So you want to go to var log in your file system and tail, which shows you the newest entries into that log. So you would go to var log, and then you would tail the Open VPN log. And as these phones were registered, you would see any errors that are occurring during that registration, and that would help you solve any problems configuring that server. But it's extremely straightforward, and if you get the passphrase right and you get the port right, you're 95% home. Thank you.
And I'll point out that someone who's starting down this road for the first time and is not familiar with the technologies of VPN and SIP might feel that adding TLS signaling to the mix would assist with security, and I guess technically it does, but it also greatly complicates debug. And one of the things that when you're dealing with VPNs is you kind of have to rely, or I'm sorry, when you're dealing with TLS is you have to rely on FQDNs and DNS lookups for everything to work correctly for your TLS certs, and cutting all of that out of the equation and just using unencrypted signaling is a good starting place to go.
And I hadn't thought of it, and Lauren's absolutely correct. And I'm not talking about, of course, TLS on the audio stream. I'm talking about TLS of the VPN traffic, as Lauren pointed out. But he's right. That does increase the configuration complexity. So you could start with unencrypted commands, and that doesn't mean that the that doesn't mean that the bearer traffic is not encrypted. It just means that the exchanges are not encrypted, and the chances of somebody being a man-in-the-middle attack and decoding that is it's virtually it's not something you need to worry about.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye all.